So welcome to the Residence Palace International Press Center in Brussels. My name is Isabelle Hoberg. I am the director of the International Press Center. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to this 6th edition of the Residence Palace Talks for Journalists. Today focusing on the theme of the role of critical raw material in a changing geopolitical landscape. Before we dive into the topic, a few words for those of you who are joining us for the first time. The Talks for Journalists are an initiative of the Residence Palace International Press Center in co-creation with Belgian, European and international associations and federations of journalists, and the United Nations Regional Information Center for Western Europe and the Belgian Federal Institute for Sustainable Development and journalists themselves. These talks are roundtable discussions designed specifically for you, journalists and news editors, in the context of the climate emergency and the crossing of several planetary boundaries. Our intention is to provide you with more tools to navigate misinformation, greenwashing, and the often highly technical aspects of the climate crisis. Climate crisis that affects, as you know, every sector of our society: education, finance, economy, industry, mobility, agriculture, employment, energy, culture, and more. These meetings are for you and shaped by you. If there are topics you would like to discuss or explore, or speakers you would like to hear from, please let us know. There is a sheet of paper on the table at the entrance. We aim to keep these exchanges intimate and conversational, a dialogue between experts and journalists. Each speaker will have a maximum of 10 to 15 minutes as an introduction, after which the floor will be open for discussions. The expert's introduction will be recorded, but not the discussions that follow. So please feel free to add and to share with the expert with your own experience, challenges you encountered on your work field, for example. Today's session will conclude at 10:30. The speaker's contact details will be displayed on that screen at the end, should you wish to follow up with them afterwards. After this session, you will also have the opportunity to interview the speakers in the room next door, just in front. Don't forget to enjoy the breakfast in the corner, help yourself. And lastly, between partners, we have planned a rotating system of governance, each partner taking care of organizing a meeting in turn. Today's session has been organized by the Belgian Federal Institute for Sustainable Development. I give now the floor to our moderator, Gilbert Duherway, head of the Critical Raw Materials Knowledge Unit of the Belgian Federal Institute for Sustainable Development. I wish all of you a rewarding and inspiring morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new edition of the Residence Palace Talk for Journalists. And as you said, I'm Dr. Gilbert Duherway, and I'm the head of Unit Critical Raw Material. And the topic that brings us today here has a big importance: the role of critical raw material in a changing geopolitical landscape. Faced with the urgency of climate change and the energy transition, the stakes related to these resources have been more pressing. The critical raw material, far more than just simple mineral, have become the bedrock of our technological and sustainable future. They are indispensable for manufacturing electric car, solar panel, also for our smartphone, computer, and the cutting-edge medical equipment. The demand for these resources is growing exponentially, and the complexity of the supply chain, often concentrated in just few regions in the world, created significant geopolitical vulnerability. Understanding these dynamics, the economy, environmental, and security implication is essential for us to cover this issue with the depth and nuance they deserve. So today, to clarify this reflection, we have the privilege of welcoming two leading experts. First, Ambassador Heath Mull, as Special Envoy for Energy Supply Security and Critical Raw Material at the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and with a richly diverse diplomatic career, including key positions at NATO and the UN. Ambassador Mull will provide us with invaluable geopolitical and strategy insights with a Belgian view into these challenges. We will also have the pleasure of hearing from Professor Karel Van Acker, please, welcome, a professor at KUL Leuven and a leading figure in the circular economy. Professor Van Acker specializes in practical strategy for sustainable circularity, critical material supply chain, and recycling. His expertise will be crucial in understanding how to build a more resilient future. So let's now dive in this fascinating subject. We will start with the professor to do like a general map of the critical raw material, and then we will continue with the ambassador. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I was not prepared to being the first one, but I will. So, welcome everybody. There is also a presentation. So, I will place myself here so that you can see my slides. So I'm professor at the KU Leuven, University of Leuven, and I have a joint appointment in the engineering faculty and the economics faculty, which already says a bit what this kind of research is about. So what we are doing is basically looking at the economic and environmental aspects of critical raw materials and what our strategies are to make, as Gilbert said, to make our society more resilient. So I would just, in the first 5 minutes, I would like to sketch a bit the scene.
Sorry, you lost your mic. Sorry.
No problem. So in the first minutes, I would like to set the scene. As already has been said by Gilbert, we indeed are facing the transition towards more sustainable technologies, and especially technologies that are carbon neutral, so more renewable technologies. So it's a big transition, and we need a lot of resources for that, especially resources that are more exotic, let's say, and not that well known. And now it doesn't work anymore. Oh, sorry. Yeah, now it works too quickly. Yeah, so the first problem with this supply of resources is that the demand is increasing a lot, as been said before. If you look at the general increase of demand of resources, all studies says that by 2060 we will need double as much resources as we need today. That's a doubling in, let's say, 35 years. That's an enormous challenge in itself. But specific materials for these technologies, as for the batteries of cars, for example, we need a lot of lithium, we need nickel and so forth, which are these critical metals. These demand increases are incredibly high. If we look at Europe, for example, the increase that we see coming by 2050 is 35 times the amount of lithium that we needed in 2020, 35 times. So that's the challenge. The other challenge is that resourcing and making all these materials has an enormous impact on the environment. So the IPCC report, for example, shows us that that's already an older number for 2050, but 15, sorry, that 23% of all the global CO2 emissions, or I should say greenhouse gas emissions, are related to the sourcing and production of materials. And that share is increasing. So we decrease actually the share of CO2 emissions in energy production, but the share of materials production in the global CO2 emissions is increasing over the years, as you can see. So that's a problem. And it's not only about CO2 emissions. Of course, climate is a very important challenge, but it's also about biodiversity, for example, about human rights. Let's first coming back to the CO2 emissions. Something that we have to realize, and I know it's a very European perspective that I will take here, but if we look at the technologies that are used in Europe, for example, we can produce these materials with less CO2 emissions, since technologies are very innovative and there is a very stringent environmental legislation in Europe as well. For example, if you look at lithium, we could produce lithium with 70% less of CO2 emissions in Europe than is the average globally. So that's also an aspect that we also have to consider if we talk about geopolitics later on. It's also about biodiversity, for example, since a big share of the nickel that we also need for the cathodes of batteries is coming from Indonesia. It's the first line here. So 27% of the nickel that we source in Europe is coming from Indonesia. And there is a very big pressure on tropical forests, for example. So the environmental circumstances are not that favorable over there, and there's a big pressure on biodiversity. Okay, a third challenge, and it's actually an opportunity in how we deal with resources, is that we were not able over the past 30, 40 years to increase productivity of resources. What does that mean? If you look at productivity, productivity is actually something that drives economy, that does economy grow. And the economy has grown, for example, by a major increase in labor productivity. Every hour that work is delivered, we deliver more economic value. That's what it means. And all governments, I think, are very much stressing the fact that we have to increase productivity. And it's mainly labor productivity that is increased. Energy productivity as well. With every kilowatt hour of energy, we are able to produce more economic outputs. But look at materials productivity worldwide. It stays the same. So we need as much materials as 40 years ago to make the same products. We didn't learn to be more efficient in doing that. And there is a big opportunity in there, since if we want economy to grow, it's there that we have to look to increase productivity of materials. So that sketches a bit the scene. What can we now do? And I take again the European perspective here, and it's based on reports that we have been writing 4 years ago already for Eurometaux, that it has been used to create a Critical Raw Materials Act of the European Commission. So we can mainly do 4 things. We can look in Europe. Can we not mine more in Europe? I will not dwell on that too much, but we don't mine a lot in Europe, and we have possibilities. We can mine lithium. We can mine rare earth metals that are used for the magnets in these electromotors, for example. In principle, we can do that. We have reserves in Europe. But of course, there are a lot of hurdles there. Permission, you need the permissions for doing that. There is a lot of resistance of citizens and so forth. It takes a long time. And on average, open a new mine is a very big thing, so that needs time. So that's one thing, but we have to do that. In any case, we have to do that to become a bit more independent from all the resources that we source from other countries. What we also can do is looking better at the imports of our raw materials. I didn't include, since I thought I would be the second one, so I thought that you would explain more the geopolitics of it. But we can look at where do we source all these critical materials. A lot of them, for example, are coming from China. We know that. We have to diversify in a very geopolitically stressed area. We really have to diversify where we source materials. We are not alone on that market. That we have to realize. There is a lot of competition. The US and China themselves, they are also looking for these resources. So there is a lot of competition. It will not be easy the coming years to get our share there. What can we else do? Recycle more. That sounds evident. I have 2 slides on that. Sorry. I have 2 slides on that. What is the recycling potential? Well, you have to divide these materials in 2 types of materials. There are what we call the commodities, materials used in large markets, let's say, such as aluminium, copper. We do recycle them already quite well. There is potential to increase it by 5 to 10%, which is, regarding the volumes, is already a big volume. But it's quite modest, let's say, the improvement that we can achieve. We need more collection, better collection, smarter design of products. We need to halt actually the leakage of scrap to other continents. The big opportunities are in recycling these more exotic new materials, let's say, the real critical raw materials such as lithium, nickel. They are barely recycled in Europe. We do have the technologies, or we do have the pilots for that. We need to invest in it to get that done. And if we invest in it, we are able to recycle up to 77%, for example, of the lithium by 2050. We have to do that now. We have to start now. But what we also have to know is that this market for waste to recycle, that will develop. So we buy a lot of electric vehicles now at this moment, but we recycle the electric vehicles of 10, 15, 20 years old. So we just have this amount of 10 to 15 years ago. That's a small amount with respect to the big amount of these vehicles that we buy today. So it doesn't cover today our supply, but by 2050 we have a good opportunity to cover a big share of the supply of lithium, nickel, and so forth. So we have to really do that today. And then there is a 4th strategy that we can look at, and I call it demand reduction. So we also have to look at where do we need all these materials. Well, 60% of all these critical raw materials, we need them for transport, electrical mobility mainly. So the big share is there. So the question there is, can we not organize that mobility in a better way, as comfortable as today? But we have 3 options to do that and to try to reduce the demand for all these materials. That's by innovation. We can try to reduce the mass, design better cars. It's not evident since we have seen the reverse trend actually. The cars have become heavier instead of lighter. But we can also try to intensify the use. So if we don't sell the cars, but we sell the function of the cars to people, we can share cars by new business models. Then we don't need that many cars to serve the whole population, let's say. So that's intensifying the use of it. and also the lifetime could be extended. If we extend the lifetime by, cars are repaired that basically very well. But for other products, this is certainly a very interesting thing to do. So these are the three aspects of demand reduction that we really have to look at. And we do simulations on that, for example, on the car fleet in Belgium. And we look at how the demand of aluminium in the blue line or lithium is evolving over time in 10, 20, 30 years. And what would happen if we reduce them or if we combine these three strategies? And we see that basically we can reduce this demand by about 30% by combining reasonable demand reduction strategies, which is a very important aspect. Is that short term, that's very unsure. That's the problem with this kind of strategies, since it depends on behavior of people. That can go fast, but that can also take time. That's not easy to predict. So the last thing that I would like to add to this slide, so we had these 4 strategies that we have to follow. I know that people and journalists probably as well, you want all simple solutions. There are not simple solutions. We have to do these 4 strategies all together, and we have to start them today. The only thing that I want to add is that this demand reduction is a bit underestimated. We have a lot of legislation in Europe that is mainly based on these 3 first strategies, the Critical Raw Materials Act, for example. This one, more effort could be done to also introduce these strategies. In all simulations, all scientists actually agree that there are many more opportunities to reduce the demand and to alleviate also this criticality of materials in the future. So, thank you very much. I hope I stick a bit to the timing.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. Maybe now we can move to the geopolitical view with the ambassador.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. De Hervé and Fido, to give me the opportunity to say a few words about how we look at it in Belgium at government level and where we stand. I have no slides because I've just taken up this new position and I'm still in the phase of trying to understand what it's all about. I've been appointed in November to become a special envoy for the supply of energy and critical raw materials. It's a new function within the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the idea is to better streamline the many services in our ministry, I should say the Federal Public Service, but that are dealing somehow with critical raw materials and with energy. These are trade people, these are industry policy people, competition people, these are the people from the cooperation, development cooperation, and these are also our geographic desks. They are all dealing with these two subjects, and the idea is to try to streamline that. Of course, in close cooperation with the colleagues that are really in charge. These are the colleagues from the Ministry of the Economics and, of course, the regions, the Flemish and the Walloon and Brussels region. And the idea behind all that is that ensuring secure, sufficient, affordable supply of energy and critical raw materials requires us to look, of course, beyond but not only, but beyond the borders of Belgium and the European Union. They require us to work with third countries, government of third countries. They also require us to interact with the European Union institutions, with multilateral institutions, and that is, of course, the value added of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So maybe some words about the context. which is, of course, geopolitical, but not merely geopolitical. I see that the question of resilience in the supply chain of CRM is mostly put in the context of geopolitical developments. But there is more to that than just, if I can say so, geopolitics. Of course, geopolitics can lead to disruption, and they have already. Think about the Russian gas exports that fell away a few years ago after Putin invaded Ukraine. Think about titanium exports from Russia that have been reduced dramatically. Think about Chinese export control mechanisms and restrictions. And so it's clear that these risks have increased dramatically over, let's say, the last decade or so. But there are also the normal politics or the not geopolitical politics. There is also the phenomenon of resource nationalism that have nothing to do with geopolitics. And there may be the DRC, cobalt export restrictions seem to me an example of a combination of politics and resource nationalism. And then beyond politics, of course, natural disaster can strike. A tsunami, an earthquake can lame temporarily or over a longer time a crucial logistic crossroads. Accidents can happen. Remember Suez. Social troubles can break out. They can paralyze a country, but they can also paralyze an industry or a logistical crossroads. And all these can have potentially disruptive effects on the supply chains, especially when these supply chains, which is often the case for CRM, are geographically pretty concentrated. So we need to de-risk these supply chains, of course, because of the risk for disruption in these CRM value chains have increased, but not just because they have increased, not just because the risk as such has increased, also because these value chains themselves have become massively more important to our economies and our industries than was the case, let's say again, more or less 1 decade ago. And you hinted at it, they are about to become even more crucial. Demand for CRM, for instance, for batteries, is about to double until 2050. And so they are going to become even more crucial as we are transitioning towards climate neutrality, as we are digitalizing, and also as we are, because of the geopolitics, now investing more and more in defense capabilities and industries. So not only the risks on disruption are increasing, but so are the potential consequences of this disruption. Imagine us failing to reach climate neutrality because geopolitics or other dramatic events have taken away our access to CRM, which we need just to become climate neutral. And finally, to complete the picture, we do not just need to de-risk, the professor mentioned it, in parallel, we need to massively upscale. So demand is soaring, the supply is lagging behind, concentrated in an overseeable number of countries. For CRM, for batteries, we are talking about more or less 10 countries. When we are talking about the refining and processing, it's even a smaller number of countries. Among those countries, there are more than quite a few that are not so really dependable as a stable supplier because of weak governance, because of geopolitical ambitions, etc., etc. And so all the big major modern economies, EU, US, Japan, Korea, also China, we will increasingly be vying and competing for the same CRM, which puts an additional edge on the challenge. And so this is the context. Yeah? And the European Commission has seen that. Member states also have understood the challenge. And together, the European Union and member states, in order to have a fighting chance, if I may say so, to succeed in securing our necessary supply chains, we have put together an act, a strategy or an act, the Critical Raw Materials Act. And this has entered into force more or less 1 year ago, on the 23rd of May last year during the Belgian presidency. And so the objective of this act is to ensure a secure, a resilient and sustainable supply of critical raw materials that are essential for the EU's green and digital transitions, as well as for our strategic autonomy. Maybe some key elements of this act. The idea is, of course, to reduce dependency on third countries by increasing EU domestic capacity. The professor has hinted at that, and diversifying non-EU sourcing. So strengthening domestic capacity has 3 aspects to it. We want to develop a capacity of extraction inside the European Union by 2030 that should cover 10% of our EU demands. We have the ambition of processing domestically within the EU 40% of the critical raw materials that we need. And we want to recycle by 2030 25% of the CRMs consumed in our European Union. And we do not want to depend for more than 65% on one single non-European Union country. And so how do we want to do that? The Critical Raw Materials Act provides for strategic partnerships that the EU wants to set up with third countries. And there are already maybe 15 of them. They also want to focus on strategic projects inside the European Union. There are more or less, I think, 45 of them as yet identified. The Critical Raw Materials Act also intervenes in the permitting processes of member states in order to try to go quicker. Yeah. What I miss in the Critical Raw Materials Act is a dedicated pot of money. So the Commission is going to see where the money sources are in other programs, all kinds of programs, and trying to pull monies from over there. But a dedicated pot of money, a capacity to provide for equity is not yet there. And so this is going to be a challenge in the development or in the negotiations for the next multi-annual financial framework. In Belgium, we have set up a whole set of working groups, interfederal, between the federal and regional level, to try to implement. But we have also set up, organized with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Economics Ministry and the regions, we have set up a round table with the industry, with government, with civil society. And the idea was to inform them about how do we plan to implement the CRMA, what have we already decided to do, but mostly to hear from them how they see what we should do in order to get there and in order to secure our value chains. And so what I would like to do briefly is maybe go through some of of the insights that got out of this round table. It's not rocket science. Huh? First of all, everything starts with a decent knowledge of the problem. That's where we need universities and professors. And in the case of CRM, it's absolutely not evident. Every single mineral and metal has its own value chain, supply chain specificity. And so this means that for each of these 34 minerals and metals, we need to map the supply chain from the mine to the end product. And we need, at each stage, to conduct a criticality assessment in order to identify the bottlenecks. Because there's absolutely no sense in, for instance, increasing domestic mining capacity for a certain mineral if there is no refining capacity. And or to invest in the refining capacity when the next stage, for instance, producing a part of a turbine, happens outside the EU. And so we really need to chart all these processes in order to identify the problem so that we can take the necessary measures. So sometimes the bottleneck will be at extraction level. That means we need to diversify our sources, maybe inside the EU, most probably also outside the EU. In other cases, it's going to be the processing or the refining that will be the bottleneck. There we also need either to invest or find solutions outside the EU or inside the EU. And then for other metals, and you mentioned it, it can very well be that we have enough in our urban waste, as we call it, and that there we have the resources through recycling to get the CRM we need. This is not a short-term solution, as you explained. The quantities are not yet there, but there is a lot of potential. And so this is a huge undertaking, charting all that. And then the question is, should we prioritize? Are there sectors that are more important than others? Should we consider stockpiling? Who is going to pay for stockpiling? What can be the effects on the markets, on pricing, etc., etc. So these are all questions that we have identified. We don't yet have the answers to all these questions. But what we saw is it's always smart to do what you do best, and to develop what you do best. And so we see with our industry that Belgium is not really a mining country anymore, not in Belgium and not outside of Belgium. Our companies are not really interested anymore in starting to develop new digging activities. So probably for at Belgian level with Belgian companies, there is probably no sense in starting developing that kind of activity. But on the other hand, we are extremely good at processing and recycling of critical minerals. Our ecosystem in Belgium, we produce more or less half of all 34 critical raw materials identified. Not half in volume, I mean from the 34, more or less 15, 17, 18 are being produced in Belgium. And in some cases, Belgium is the only producer inside the whole of the EU. Yeah? And in some cases, we produce enough to provide all of the EU with all they need. So this is an industry that invests a lot in research and development. And so we think, together with them, that it's smart for us to see how we can support and further help developing that industry. And then we need to do something about scrap. You mentioned it. A lot of scrap is being in Europe is being selected. Trié, not sure about the English word. And then it disappears. It disappears into Asia. What we need to do is we need to start considering scrap as a resource and not as a waste. And so we need to change the legislation and to create a true EU domestic market for scrap. Recycling will be a crucial part of the supply solution, as you mentioned, but only a part. So virgin materials, we are going to continue to need them, and we are certainly not going to be able to source all of them domestically. So we will need to have to go abroad, and fast. And while doing so, we need to, this came from this round table, we need to assemble tailor-made high-quality packages for individual mineral-rich countries. Packages that differentiate us, European Union and member states, from other countries, from competing countries. We need to consider allowing these mineral-rich countries in the south to get a larger chunk of the value chain. There has to be something in it for them. They do not wish to remain or to become a mere exporter of the raw material. They want a bigger chunk of the value chain, and our industry tells us this is also the way to go, which is important to note. So we need to enter into true strategic partnerships with these countries. This also means we need to set up financing mechanisms. We need to set up risk management mechanisms. And they have to be well funded. So this is also a challenge. Same goes for technical cooperation. So I think by way of conclusion, and really I have not checked how long my speech is, so probably I'm a bit over time. But
Nearly time to finish.
yeah, well, voilà. And so by way of conclusion, I think Belgium and the European Union, we are at the start of a longer process in a context of very, very high stakes. Climate and digital transition, keeping our industry, keeping it competitive preferably, investing in defense. Also in the context of very, very tough competition. But I really do think when we play it well, when we act fast, when we stand together, EU member states, European Commission, when we stick to our standards, so that we can differentiate ourselves, engage third countries with an eye for their and their population's interests, we stand a fighting chance of securing a fair share of the global CRM production. A fair share. But it's probably not going to be enough, that fair share, that non-vulnerable fair share. And so anyway, and Professor mentioned it, we will need to do more. We will need to look at technical innovation, at substitution, circularity, increased efficiency. So voilà, that's a bit what I wanted to tell you, and that's also a bit what I understand of the problem after more or less 5 months into this new job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Professor. So we understand that critical raw material are the big subject now. As if we find solution, and we understand that there is no one solution, there is a mix of solution. If we find this balance, I mean, in this so many solutions, then we will have a best picture, I think, for the future, for a sustainable future.